It let us leave. The lock was already cut, not freshly. Rust had begun to creep across the bent metal where the cutters had bitten through, thin orange veins spreading outward like infection. The chain hung loose against the fence, clicking softly in the wind. Caleb stood in front of it a long moment longer than necessary. The slaughterhouse loomed behind the fence in total darkness, a massive block of concrete and steel rising out of a field of brittle weeds and frost-silvered gravel. No lights, no sound, just the bulk of it, inert and waiting. Marek shifted behind him. Someone's been here. Everyone's been here, Caleb said. He lifted the chain and slid it free. The fence gate gave a tired, loose rattle as he pushed it open. The sound echoed farther than it should have across the empty loading yard. The cold came immediately. Not outdoor cold, not wind. This was sealed cold, air that had lived in shadow for years and never fully warmed again. It rolled out of the building in a slow, heavy exhale. They both felt it. Marek clicked on his headlamp first. The beam hit the open loading bay door and died in blackness just a few meters in. Inside swallowed light. Caleb followed. The interior air was thick with the memory of chemicals, iron, and something older that lingered beneath both. Dried fat embedded in porous concrete, rot that had seeped so far into the structure it could no longer fully fade. The kind of smell you don't consciously register until it's already in your lungs. Boots echoed as they stepped inside. The main receiving floor opened wide around them. High ceiling, heavy overhead rails branched in rigid grids across the darkness, disappearing into black trusses far above. The rails still carried hooks on some tracks. Thick, crescent steel shapes spaced every few feet, hanging in patient silence. Caleb's lamp drifted low across the floor. Shallow concrete channels cut into the slab sloped gently toward wide grated drains at the center of the room. Old stains darkened the channels in long streaks, the lines never quite washed out. Marek moved ahead and to the right without needing to say anything, sweeping the outer wall. They stayed within each other's light but didn't crowd. Years of this had taught them how far apart safety lived. The facility was empty, stripped. Not gutted violently the way some were, no torn copper, no smashed control panels. This place had been closed deliberately, machines removed methodically, lines capped. Only the bones of the operation remained. A door to the cutting floor stood partly open ahead. Cold thickened with every step. They passed between heavy steel tables, most bolted permanently into the floor. Circular mounting rings still showed where saws once stood. The hum of refrigeration was gone, but the chill it had carved into the concrete had never quite left. Hooks swayed faintly when the air shifted. Caleb kept his breathing measured. The quiet here felt layered, not empty, thick with a low, constant pressure that pressed at the back of his skull. Sound didn't behave the way it should. Their footsteps sometimes vanished after a step. Other times they echoed too long, repeating themselves in the rafters like delayed answers. They crossed into the cutting hall proper. Here the rails became dense, layered 3 and 4 rows deep above their heads. Chains pooled on the floor beneath some tracks in heavy rusted coils. Old drainage hoses lay half buried in dust along the walls. Everything was still. They split organically, each taking a side of the hall while keeping the other in peripheral light. Their lamps skated across stainless steel surfaces dulled by years of grime. Minutes passed. Heat temperature continued to drop. Faint frost clung to the edges of some sealed freezer doors at the far end of the hall. The power was long dead, but the insulated pockets of the structure still held cold like sealed wounds. Caleb stepped over a fallen length of chain and felt something scrape lightly over his boot. He paused, looked down. It was nothing, just a loose hook, long rusted and blunt at the tip. He nudged it aside with his toe. It dragged across the tile with a dry, teeth-on-bone sound. That was when something fell. Not metal. Not chain. A heavy, wet impact echoed from somewhere inside the plant. The vibration traveled up through the floor and into Caleb's shins before the sound itself reached his ears. It wasn't a crash. It wasn't sharp. It was the sound of weight hitting concrete. They both stopped. Marek lifted his light toward the deeper corridors without turning his head. Caleb felt the shift without needing to look. The facility went unnaturally quiet after that single impact. No follow-up clatter, no scatter of debris, just the faint drip of distant condensation resuming its rhythm. Then came the dragging. Slow. Measured. Flesh or something heavy pulled across smooth tile. It was coming from the cold storage wing. Caleb felt his chest tighten. You hear that? Marek nodded once. They moved together now. The connecting corridor narrowed quickly, the ceiling lowering as insulated pipe racks crisscrossed overhead. The cold intensified to the point that Caleb's breath began to faintly fog in front of his face. His lamp picked up shimmering crystals along fractured freezer seams. Halfway down the corridor, they found the overturned trolley. It lay on its side, tipped cleanly over as if lifted and dropped rather than knocked. One wheel still turned slowly, whining faintly in protest. Beneath it, the floor was wet. Not water. The liquid was viscous. It clung to the tile and pooled in the shallow slope of the drain channel. Caleb's light followed it. The trail led through the open freezer bay doorway into the cold hall beyond. The dragging had stopped. They stood just inside the threshold, listening. Cold storage had a way of amplifying silence. No drafts here, no exterior noise. Even their breathing returned to them altered, softened, and stretched thin by insulated walls. Marek took one step forward. Something inhaled in the dark. The sound came from between two open freezer doors on the far side of the hall, a deep, rasping intake of air that carried moisture in every trembling vibration. Eyes reflected in their beams. Not pinpoint reflections like an animal in the woods. Flat panes of pale light fixed at human height, too still, too wide set. Then the thing stepped out. At first glance, it stood like a worn man unfolding from a crouch. 2 legs. 2 arms. Broad shoulders. The illusion lasted only half a second. Its arms were too long. Its elbows bent backward slightly as it fully extended its weight. Its chest was deeply barrel-shaped and moved unevenly with each breath. Patches of coarse, dark hair clung in thick ridges along its spine and upper arms, while the skin of its chest and throat was bare, scarred, and pallid under the cold light. The head was elongated forward, not lupine, not human. The jaw extended too far, heavy at the hinge, sagging open just enough to show layered teeth inside, some sharp, some flat, all massive. It looked at them, not with rage, with assessment. It exhaled. A thick, wet rush of air spilled from its throat. Then it dropped to all fours. The shift was violent and instantaneous. Its shoulder girdle rotated forward with an audible pop. Its spine rolled like a heavy chain thrown onto the floor. Claws, thick and blunt with layered keratin growth, scraped as its weight redistributed. It launched. Caleb turned and ran as Marek shouted into the void behind them. They tore back down the corridor as metal screamed overhead. Chains whipped violently as the creature smashed through hanging steel. The sound was deafening now, amplified by insulated walls and stripped concrete. Caleb felt the vibration of its pursuit through the soles of his boots. Footsteps slammed behind him, Marek for 3 seconds, then suddenly nothing but the thunder of something heavier. They hit the first junction in a blind sprint. Instinct split them. Caleb veered left into the boning rooms. Marek disappeared right. The sound of pursuit followed Caleb. The boning rooms were tight and cluttered with permanent steel fixtures. Narrow aisles formed hard corners every few meters. Hanging saws swayed wildly as Caleb burst through their space, some colliding with each other in sharp, echoing strikes. The creature did not slow. It surged around corners without hesitation, its body compressing and extending like a piston, claws striking sparks from table legs as it redirected. Caleb vaulted a low steel table and felt air shift violently behind him as something enormous cleared the obstacle without effort. Sound became meaningless. Everything blurred into overlapping layers of metal shriek, breath thunder, and the dull, suffocating pressure of cold air tearing at his lungs. A chain caught his shoulder and spun him sideways. He crashed into a tiled wall, hard enough to knock the air from his chest. He pushed off blindly, pain flaring white through his arm as claws raked past where his head had been a second earlier. He burst through a maintenance door and into the smokehouse tunnels. The tunnel narrowed immediately. Brick walls closed in on either side, blackened by decades of cured gases and oil. The floor was uneven here, sloped and slick with residue that never quite dried. The roar behind him compressed into something worse. Contained. The creature's breathing filled the tunnel like a bellows pumping poison. Caleb ran with no sense of distance now, only momentum, only the raw arithmetic of space behind him shrinking faster than what lay ahead. A side conduit appeared without warning. He dove into it as claws tore brick behind his heels. The conduit dead-ended 20 meters later. He skidded to a stop in total darkness. Silence flooded back in so violently his ears rang. Then breath returned behind him at the conduit mouth. Slow. Measured. Patient. Caleb backed against the far wall, raising his light with shaking hands. The creature filled the entrance. Its shoulders barely fit the width of the tunnel. It lowered its head slightly as it studied the confined space, not frustrated, not rushed. Calculating. It took one deliberate step forward. From somewhere deep within the plant, metal crashed again. Louder this time. The sound echoed through multiple chambers and ducts, sharp and violent. The creature's head snapped toward it instantly. Its breathing changed. It hesitated. Caleb didn't. He slammed himself sideways into the crumbling brick at the conduit's end, clawing at mortar and fractured concrete like an animal. The wall gave way inches at a time under pure panic strength. Brick tore loose, skin shredded, pain disappeared beneath the surge. The creature lunged. Claws raked through empty air as Caleb forced his head and shoulders through the collapsing partition and fell screaming into darkness on the other side. He landed on broken concrete and slid. Rolled. Scrambled upright and ran. Stairs appeared without warning. Up, up, up. He burst through a fire door and into the outer processing yard. Night slammed into his face. Cold air burned his lungs raw. He stumbled across gravel and didn't stop until his vision tunneled and his legs buckled under him. He turned only when footsteps approached from the trees. Marek emerged from the opposite side of the facility, bleeding from one sleeve but moving under his own power. They locked eyes across open ground. For 2 seconds, neither spoke. Then a deep sound rolled out of the slaughterhouse behind them. Not a roar. A long, wet exhalation. Listening. They ran. Marek did not run towards safety. Not at first. Instinct had taken him right at the junction, down a narrower service passage that dropped in elevation almost immediately. He sprinted blind, shoulder-clipping walls, headlamp beam bouncing in erratic cones that showed him nothing but fragments of pipe, brick, and frost-silvered steel. Behind him, the sound followed. Not footsteps. Weight. Distributed across too many points of contact. The creature did not charge him the way it had Caleb. It pursued him like it already understood something about the layout. Marek hit a dead end barely 30 seconds in, an old sanitation sump choked with stagnant black water and collapsed grating. He skidded to a stop just as the sound behind him went quiet. Silence returned with a suddenness that made his ears ring. He stood there, chest heaving, lamp shaking, waiting for the impact that never came. Then a scraping sound whispered above him. He looked up just as claws slid across the brick ceiling and vanished into darkness. The thing was moving over the corridors, not confined by the same geometry. Marek turned and ran back the way he'd come, not caring how loud he was now. Panic made sound irrelevant. All that mattered was distance. He burst into a packaging hall, a massive chamber once filled with conveyor belts and sealing stations. Most of the equipment had been removed, leaving a grid of thick anchor bolts protruding from the concrete like blunt teeth. The floor here was slick. Animal fat never fully leaves porous surfaces. Even after years, it lingers in a film you can't see until your foot finds it too fast. Merrick's boot skidded. He caught himself on a support column just as something landed behind him with a violent slap of flesh and mass. The creature rose to partial height, shoulders and head silhouetted in the beam of his light. Its skin was mottled up close, scar tissue overlapping scar tissue, old fractures healed poorly beneath tight, pale flesh. Its respirations came in wet, uneven pulls, lung tissue clearly compromised. This thing did not run for pleasure. It ran because running was how it ate. Marek bolted forward as the creature surged after him. He cut between conveyor frames, ducked under sagging steel belts, vaulted a fallen workstation. Twice he nearly went down as his boots slid unpredictably across the floor. The creature adapted. When it lost grip, it slowed rather than barreling blindly. It placed each limb deliberately, using its arms as shock absorbers, its claws angling to bite into softer seams of concrete. It did not make mistakes. Marek burst through a side door and into the old kill floor showers. Cold mist still clung to the air here, trapped in insulated walls. Dozens of rusted shower heads hung overhead in dense rows. The drains beneath them were open and black. Water still dripped from somewhere high above. He ran straight through. Something slammed into the wall beside him, hard enough to fracture brick. Dust and concrete fragments exploded across his face. He felt impact tear skin from his cheek without feeling the pain. He veered blindly into another corridor, and suddenly the chase stopped. The creature did not follow. Instead, it withdrew. Marek heard its breath fade backward, retreating into intersecting passages overhead. The silence that followed was worse than the pursuit. He slowed to a trembling walk. Listened. Nothing. Only the distant drip of water, the faint tick of cooling metal. His lungs burned. Blood ran warm down his sleeve, but he could not tell yet if it was his or the plant's. He moved again, slower now. The kill floor opened toward the old livestock receiving bays, massive steel-walled chambers once used to hold animals before processing. The gates still stood, heavy slatted fences on thick hinge pins. Most were frozen in place. One stood open. Marek passed through it cautiously. Inside, the air was different. Thicker. The floor here was not tiled but bare concrete, deeply scored by hooves that had panicked and slipped here decades earlier. Bone fragments littered the far wall, long since bleached and brittle. Not new, but not ancient either. Something had gnawed here long after the slaughterhouse closed. Marek swept his light slowly. The beam caught on a nest against the back of the wall. Not neatly constructed, just a heavy accumulation of debris, fabric, insulation foam, and animal remains, crushed together by repeated pressure. Tufts of dark hair clung to the corners. Dried blood had soaked so deeply into the concrete beneath it that the stain could not be distinguished from shadow. The creature did not merely pass through this place. It lived here. Marek backed away one slow step at a time. The light caught on something at the far edge of the chamber and glinted dully. A human boot. Not old. Fresh tread. Marek's stomach turned over. Caleb, he whispered without thinking. A slow breath answered him from above. He had forgotten to look up. The creature dropped from the upper gate track in a silent collapse of mass and muscle. Marek ran. He didn't remember turning. He didn't remember choosing direction. Only momentum existed again. Behind him, the predator did not immediately accelerate. It tracked. He could hear it calculating intersections from the changes in sound pressure behind him, its footsteps spreading wide into branching echoes as it selected its path. It was not chasing now. It was herding. Marek crashed through a maintenance hatch and into the janitor's crawl space, a service maze barely wide enough for a human torso. Pipes pressed in on every side. Insulation hung in heavy tatters like decomposing skin. He forced himself forward on elbows and knees, breath scraping painfully through his chest. The space behind him filled with wet respiration again. The thing pushed only far enough into the crawl space to satisfy itself that he could not turn. Then it withdrew. Its breath receded, and it began moving in parallel through the walls, tracking him through sound, through vibration, through memory. Marek crawled until his fingers bled. The crawl space ended in a vertical utility shaft with a rusted ladder bolted into the brick. He climbed blindly, hands slipping on damp iron rungs. The shaft opened into an exterior service vestibule near the administrative wing. Moonlight spilled in through shattered glass. Merrick burst out into cold air on shaking legs and did not stop running until the trees pulled him under. He staggered forward, lungs tearing. Then he saw Caleb. They stood across open gravel between the facility and the forest, both barely upright. Neither asked what the other had seen. They didn't need to. Behind them, the slaughterhouse exhaled. The sound rolled through broken windows and open bays, slow, heavy, and wet. It was not calling. It was confirming. The predator had learned its terrain again, and chosen not to follow. They ran together into the trees. Branches tore at them. Gravel gave way to loam and roots and frozen undergrowth. Darkness swallowed the last hard edges of the plant behind them. They ran until their lungs failed. Only when the night itself became quiet again did they finally collapse beneath the trees. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Wind moved through cedar needles overhead. Far away, metal rang once inside the abandoned structure. Not a crash. Not a hunt. Just movement. Caleb stared into the dark between the trunks and understood something with cold certainty. The thing had not chased them to kill them. It had chased them to test them. And the plant had not been abandoned at all. They lay there for a while, sprawled in the cold under the trees, lungs burning, limbs shaking so hard they could barely keep their hands closed. Caleb's heart hurt. Not just from exertion, from the way it had pounded against his ribs in the tunnels like it had been trying to burst out and run on its own. Marek rolled onto his back and stared straight up through the branches. His headlamp beam cut a white tunnel through the needles, drifting with each tremor of his hand. His other arm hung limp against his side, sleeve dark and stiff. "You hit?" Caleb asked finally, voice sandpaper dry. Marek made a sound that was almost a laugh and almost a choke. "You ask that now?" Caleb swallowed. "You're bleeding." Came through a wall. Marek lifted the arm slightly and let it fall again. Or the wall came through me. Hard to tell. Silence settled back around them. It wasn't truly silent. There were night insects, distant traffic, the wind, but compared to the inside of the plant, it felt wrong. Too open, too exposed. Caleb pushed himself upright. His legs didn't want to listen at first. They trembled like miswired machinery, giving half-hearted protests with every attempt. He got one knee under him, then the other, and finally forced himself to stand. The slaughterhouse was mostly hidden from here. Through a gap in the trees, he could see the top of the structure, a black rectangle against the faint cloud glow of the sky. A few broken windows caught what little light there was and gave it back in dull smears, like the glint of eyes. His chest tightened again. "It's far," he told himself. "It's just a building. It's not..." From within the concrete block, something shifted. A dull thunk, followed by the faint rattle of distant chains. Caleb flinched before he could stop himself. Marek watched him, still on his back. "Still in there," he said quietly. "You saw where it sleeps," Caleb said. It wasn't a question. He'd seen the way Marek had come out of the trees, the look in his eyes, wide, flat, the pupils too large even for the dark. Marek nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Livestock pen, back wall, nest, thing, bones everywhere. He swallowed. Not cow. At least not all of them. Caleb remembered the boot in Marek's description, the one he hadn't said out loud yet. He didn't need to. Pieces of memory unspooled in his head out of order. The cut lock, the spinning trolley wheel, the damp floor beneath it, the way the creature had hesitated when another sound crashed deep in the building. It wasn't random, any of it. It knew the place. It used the place. He looked down at his own shaking hands. His fingers still had brick dust ground into the grooves, flakes of mortar lodged in the torn skin. They didn't look like his hands. "Why didn't it finish us?" he asked. The words came out low, more thought than speech. Merrick closed his eyes. Maybe it tried. "No," Caleb said. The conviction surprised him. It could have closed the distance. In the tunnels, on the stairs. It pulled back, twice. Marek didn't answer for a few seconds. When he did, his voice was flatter. "You think it was playing?" Caleb stared at the dark block of the plant through the trees. "I think it was learning." Another chain rattled inside, faint and brief. Both of them went still. It wasn't just fear now. It was pattern recognition. Every sound from there now had shape, weight, and intention. Merrick forced himself to sit up, using his uninjured arm to brace. His wince was sharp and involuntary. "We're not staying here," he said. "Forest edge, clear line of sight to it?" "No, we move." "Road's back that way." Caleb nodded toward the deeper trees. "Half a kilometer, maybe more." "Let's make it feel like 10, Merrick said. He tried to smile. It came out as a bare grimace, but he still pushed himself to his feet. They moved. Not running now, not really walking either, a controlled stagger through underbrush and roots, every snapped branch sounding too loud. The plant vanished behind them as the trees thickened, but Caleb could feel it like a pressure at his back. He kept waiting for the sound. Breath. Claws. Something large matching their path in the parallel dark. Nothing came. They reached the drainage ditch by the roadside in a ragged line of broken steps. Sodium streetlights flickered in the distance, throwing pale orange pools across cracked asphalt. A single truck roared past a few seconds later, the blast of air making Caleb flinch so hard his vision blurred. He hadn't realized how small the world had shrunk inside the building until it suddenly widened again. The scale gave him vertigo. They climbed out of the ditch and onto the road shoulder. Merrick turned his headlamp off. The sudden change in light made everything feel even more unreal. "Leave it," Caleb said. "Last thing I want is that place looking back at us," Merrick muttered. They walked along the road in silence for a while, listening to the distant hiss of tires and the dull buzz of electrical lines. Each mundane sound felt wrong, like it belonged to a different life. "What do we tell people?" Marek asked finally. The question hung between them, heavy, inevitable. "The truth?" Caleb said. Marek huffed. "Sure. We broke into a condemned slaughterhouse and found a thing that shouldn't exist living in the walls. That'll go over great." He shifted his injured arm and gritted his teeth. "Best case, we get trespassing charges. Worst case, they think we're insane." Caleb thought of the boot, the nest, the stains on the concrete that weren't all animal, the cold storage and its perfect isolating silence. "If we say nothing," he said, "someone else goes in eventually." Marek didn't answer. The sodium lights hummed overhead. Another truck passed, then a car. Caleb watched the streaks of headlights and taillights like they were migrating stars. "You saw the boot," Caleb said, finally voicing it. Merrick's jaw tightened. "Yeah." "How old?" "Didn't want to get that close." He swallowed. "Not ancient, though, not rotted. You know those black tactical ones everyone wears now? Like that. Laces intact, tread still sharp." Caleb closed his eyes for a second, then opened them again. The road didn't change when he did. So someone else did exactly what we did. And made worse decisions, Merrick said. Or got less lucky. Merrick snorted. You call this lucky? He shook his head, but the edge of the question stayed. The thing in there was real. Not a story, not a rumor, not a reflection of their nerves. He could still feel the weight of its breath in the tunnels. They reached a side street where they'd parked the car, half hidden behind a shuttered warehouse. The familiar shape of it felt like a prop from a forgotten scene, a mundane object left over from before the world had shifted 30 degrees sideways. Caleb unlocked it with fumbling fingers. They got inside like they were breaking in. The doors shut. The world muffled. For a long time they sat in silence, the engine left off. The silence in the car was very different from the silence in the plant. There was upholstery, the faint smell of coffee from an old thermos, a dashboard light blinking patiently. You drive, Merrick said. You can't? Caleb glanced at his arm. Left shoulder's a mess, Merrick said. You want me trying to steer when it seizes up? Caleb reached for the key. His fingers hovered over it, then withdrew. Hey, Merrick said quietly, we're out. Caleb nodded. Yeah. He turned the key. The engine caught in an ordinary, imperfect way. No dramatics, no failure, just an old car doing what it always did. They pulled away from the curb and joined the thin flow of traffic. The slaughterhouse disappeared behind warehouses and low industrial structures, then behind trees, then behind the curve of the earth. Only when it was completely gone from the mirrors did their breathing start to even out. Thank you for watching. Please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And as always, have a wonderful day.